I locked up Whitmore gifts a little after 7 in the evening, my fingers stiff from a 12-hour stretch of gift wrapping, customer smiles, and endless holiday chatter. The kind of Christmas crowd that made the little shop in downtown Ridgewood feel alive, but left my body aching the moment the last customer stepped out. I turned the sign to closed, breathed in the faint scent of pine candles still lingering in the air, and stepped outside into the Colorado cold. The sky had the soft silver glow of Christmas night, the kind that feels tender even when you are exhausted. I tucked my scarf tighter around my neck and walked toward my car. The wind carried the distant sound of church bells, drifting through the empty streets as if trying to remind the world to slow down. For a moment, I let myself breathe it in. The quiet, the crispness of winter, the faint echo of a Christmas that still held some magic for other people. It made the long day feel worth it, even though I could feel the ache in my shoulders settling deeper with each passing minute. Once I started driving, the lights of downtown fell behind me, and Ridgewood shifted into the neighborhoods that always looked like the inside of a snow globe. Families filled their porches with twinkling lights. Wreaths glowed softly on doors. I slowed the car, letting myself absorb the tiny vignettes of warmth through the windows. A group of teens in matching pajamas laughing near a fireplace. A grandmother ladled soup from a Dutch oven, while 2 little girls danced circles around her, a couple leaning close as they set the table with gold-rimmed plates. Every window was a small movie about belonging, and I let myself believe that mine was waiting for me too. David. Blake and I had always spent Christmas night together. We were not perfect as a family, but we had our little rituals. Hot cocoa after dinner, a slow drive to look at lights, music playing from our old radio. Even when things were tense between us, Christmas had always been the night we tried to meet in the middle. I held on to that as I turned onto the familiar streets toward home. By the time I reached Maple Glen Drive, the tiredness I had carried all day softened into a quiet anticipation. It reminded me of childhood, that feeling of being pulled home by something warm and familiar. And before I tell you what happened next, I am curious what you are doing while listening to this story. If you feel like sharing, tell me in the comments. As for me, that night, I was turning into my driveway believing I was heading toward a house that still wanted me. But the moment my headlights swept across the siding, the illusion cracked. The house was dark. Not dim, not half-lit, completely dark, like no one had touched a switch since morning. Dad had forgotten lights before, but not on Christmas, not when he knew I would be coming home late from the shop. I pulled in slowly, searching for something that made sense. David's truck was gone. Blake's old sedan was gone too. Even the porch light he always forgot to turn off was dead. I sat in the car for a few seconds, gripping the steering wheel. The cold seeped in even before I opened the door. When I finally stepped out, the air felt sharper than it had just moments before, as if the night itself knew I was walking into something I was not prepared for. I walked up the steps and pushed the front door open, my keys jingling weakly in my hand. The hinges groaned softly, a sound I had heard 1,000 times. But tonight it felt foreign. Inside, the house felt hollow, like it was holding its breath. I flipped the kitchen switch. The light flickered off, revealing the exact same scene I had left early that morning. Clean counters, the red table runner I had ironed 2 nights ago, the ceramic bowl in the center still filled with the oranges Dad insisted were good luck. Not a single sign of Christmas dinner. Not a single sign that anyone had planned for me to come home at all. My phone vibrated in my coat pocket. I lifted it with numb fingers. A text from Dad. Heat up the leftovers and enjoy Christmas. We are out for dinner. That was it. No explanation. No, sorry. No, we waited for you. No, hope you had a good day. Just a way to warm up something old and eat it alone. As if that was enough. As if I was enough. I stared at the message until the letters blurred. My throat tightened, and for a moment, I thought I might crumble right there on the kitchen tile. But I did not. Something inside me refused to snap in front of a text message. I walked to the refrigerator because I needed to see what leftovers even meant. The handle felt cold under my hand. When I opened the door, the yellow light washed over a single plastic container sitting right in the middle of the shelf. Inside was a piece of overcooked turkey from 2 days ago, a scoop of congealed mashed potatoes, and a spoonful of green beans that had turned a dull gray. Cold, shrinking, forgotten. Just like me. I stood there with the door open, the light spilling across my face, the cold air brushing my skin, and I could not help but wonder when exactly the shift had happened. When did my place in the family become something optional? When had I become the afterthought they no longer even remembered to pretend to include? It was not the leftovers themselves that hurt. It was the message in them. Someone else had been chosen. Someone else had been wanted. Someone else had been worth their time. I closed the fridge gently, almost reverently, as if the act itself required a kind of dignity no one else in this house had bothered to give me. My hand lingered on the door a moment longer, feeling the cool smoothness beneath my fingers. I leaned on the counter, trying to steady myself, but curiosity, or maybe instinct, pulled my hand to my phone. I tapped open Instagram. The app loaded slowly, each second stretching like a warning. Then the first picture appeared. David at a restaurant in Denver, holding a wine glass. Blake beside him, laughing like the world was perfect and whole. The restaurant was Pine Hollow, one of the most expensive places in the city. Strings of white lights hung from the ceiling. A giant wreath glowed behind them. The caption under Blake's post said, "Christmas feast with the best people." Heart emojis. Clinking glasses. That easy joy families share when everyone who matters is present. The best people. My chest tightened as I scrolled through picture after picture. A table full of appetizers. A plate of prime rib with rosemary. A dessert tower sparkling under fairy lights. David smiled in a way he had not smiled in years. Blake leaned in, talking animatedly. A woman from Dad's office sitting beside them in a red dress. I recognized her. Elaine. She often stopped by the shop to pick up cards for the office. She was kind enough, I guessed, but that was not the point. She was sitting where I should have been sitting. She was included in something meant to be ours. A family moment. A Christmas moment. Not one empty chair. Not one search for me. Not one sign that I had even crossed their minds. They had not simply gone to dinner without me. They had planned a full celebration, booked the place days ahead, dressed up, ordered the kind of meal we never splurged on, and never once thought to ask where I was or if I wanted to come. It was not an accident. It was not a miscommunication. It was a choice made days ago. A choice where I did not exist. I set my phone down slowly, as if it suddenly weighed more. The cold from outside seemed to seep into the kitchen walls. I stared at the dark window over the sink, seeing only my faint reflection. My face looked pale, tired, older somehow, like someone who had held on for too long, hoping for something that was never going to arrive. For a long moment, I did nothing. I did not scream or cry or text them back. I simply stood in the quiet house I had worked so hard to keep afloat, feeling the familiar ache of being pushed aside. Only this time, it did not slide off me the way it used to. This time, it rooted deeper. Somewhere inside, a shift began. Slow at first, like a thin crack forming under ice, a sound you almost cannot hear. But it was there. I felt it in my chest, in the way my breath steadied, in the way my fingers curled slightly on the countertops. They had erased me from Christmas night. But I was still standing here, breathing, seeing clearly for the first time in years. I was not ready to move yet, not ready to act, but the anger settling in my chest was no longer the kind that faded overnight. It was gathering weight and direction, pull threads together into something stronger, sharper, and for the first time in so long, I could not remember when it last happened. I felt something powerful stirring beneath the hurt. The beginning of a storm. I stayed there in the kitchen for a long moment, feeling that storm building quietly inside me. And as the room settled into stillness, my mind slipped backward into the years that had shaped this very moment. The truth was that tonight did not come out of nowhere. It was not a sudden cruelty. It was the result of 6 years of slowly being pushed farther and farther from the center of my own family. It started at 2018, the year Mom died. I was 25 then, still figuring out my gift shop, still believing families naturally pull closer after a loss. But ours did not. Something in Dad had cracked in a way he refused to acknowledge. And instead of leaning on both his children, he leaned almost entirely on Blake. He started calling him the boy who reminded him of better days, the one who needed guidance, the one who should carry the Whitmore name forward. I became the one who would be just fine, the independent one, the girl who could take care of herself. At first, it did not hurt. I understood grief. I understood that Dad saw Blake's softness as something fragile, something that needed his attention. So I stepped into the background willingly. I did the grocery runs. I managed the bills when Dad forgot. I handled the funeral arrangements when he shut down for a week. Blake would show up late to every meeting, hair messy, shoes untied, and Dad would smile. Meanwhile, I was the one showing up for everything. And somehow, that made me invisible. One night in early 2019, I came home from the shop carrying a box of donated candles for a fundraiser Mom had loved. David was in the living room, watching a basketball game with Blake. I remember standing there, hoping he would ask about my day. He barely looked up. "Dinner is on the stove," he said, eyes still on the screen. Blake picked the recipe. I forced a smile. I had been the one cooking every night for months, but Blake had put a frozen lasagna in the oven that afternoon. And suddenly, he was the one getting praised. Dad slapped him on the knee and said he was stepping up. That should have been the first sign, but I ignored it. I thought people acted strange when they missed someone they loved. I thought it would settle eventually. What I did not expect was how long it would eventually stretch. By late 2019, I was juggling the store, the bills, and helping Dad get back on his feet. Blake was working part-time at a gym, drifting from plan to plan, and Dad called him ambitious. I bought new tires for Dad's truck, and he thanked Blake for reminding him about them. I spent an entire weekend repainting the hallway to cover scuffs from moving. Furniture. And Dad told Blake how nice it looked. If I ever corrected him, he would shrug and say, "You know what I mean." But after a while, I stopped asking him to see me. There is a special kind of tiredness that comes from begging for the bare minimum. The worst of it hit in 2020, when the pandemic crashed into everything. Whitmore Gifts nearly collapsed in a single week. I went from steady foot traffic to an empty shop overnight. The bills sat on my counter like small threats. I spent nights twisting in bed, wondering if I should shut everything down. I still remember the night I sat with Dad at the table, show him my numbers, asking if he had advice. He listened with half his attention, nodding. I thought for a moment he might offer support or even encouragement. Then he sighed and said, "Blake needs help more than you right now. He might not get his hours back at the gym. He is struggling." I stared at him, stunned. I was drowning. My entire livelihood, the dream I had built from nothing, was slipping through my fingers. But all he could see was Blake's uncertainty. I did not argue. I did not defend myself. I went back to the shop the next morning and refused to cry. And in that desperation, something inside me shifted for the first time. I tore down half the inventory, built a new layout, and pivoted to handmade home goods. I created candle bundles and custom baskets. I started doing porch deliveries for customers who were too scared to step outside. And the shop survived. Barely. But it survived. When Dad came in months later and saw the new displays, he nodded approvingly. "You always land on your feet, kid." Not one word about how hard I had fought. Not one question about how close I had come to losing everything. Meanwhile, Blake mentioned wanting to start a fitness YouTube channel, and Dad offered him money for equipment that same afternoon. It was around then that Nora Hayden began noticing things. Nora, our neighbor since I was 9, with her wild gray curls and the kind of smile that reads straight through. People. She saw more than she ever said. One afternoon, I dropped off some packages for her at her porch, and she stepped outside, wiping her hands with a dish towel. "You look tired, Lana." "Just busy," I said. That was always my answer. "Busy is one thing," she said. "Carrying everyone is another." Her words hit me harder than she understood. She had always known my family dynamic better than most. She saw the way I was the one who kept things stitched together quietly, while Dad poured all his softness into Blake. "You get to choose yourself, too," she told me once while we sat on her porch drinking iced tea. "You do not have to wait for people to notice your worth." I brushed it off at the time. I thought loyalty meant staying in your place. I thought family meant enduring the imbalance. But Nora planted something in me that day, a seed I did not realize would grow into the resolve I felt tonight. Because standing in that cold kitchen now, watching the fridge light spill across the floor, I understood the truth. Being left alone with a plastic container of old turkey was not an accident. It was the natural next step in a long line of moments where I had been the afterthought. The girl who would figure it out. The daughter who did not need anything. The one who did not belong at the table. Not really. My family had spent years telling me who I was in this house. Tonight, they finally showed me. And as that realization sank deeper into me, the storm inside quieted into something sharper. Not rage, something older, steadier, shaped by years of being overlooked. I set my hands on the counter and drew in a slow breath. The house hummed faintly from the furnace kicking on. Somewhere outside, a neighbor's laughter drifted over the snow. It all felt so far removed from the heaviness in my chest. Tonight was not about a forgotten invitation. It was the reflection of 6 years of stray comments, quiet dismissals, and expectations that I would always stay in the background. 6 years of choosing them while they rarely chose me. And as I stood there, letting the weight of it all settle, I understood something with absolute clarity. This hurt was not new. It was simply the first time I was ready to see it. As that realization settled into my chest, something else rose to the surface. A memory I had pushed so far down that some days it felt like it belonged to someone else. A memory that had nothing to do with leftovers or Christmas dinners, but everything to do with why this house still stood, why Dad and Blake had a warm place to come home to, and why the cold silence surrounding me tonight felt like a betrayal built on top of an older one. I walked out of the kitchen and down the hallway, my steps slow, almost heavy. The old parquet floor creaked under my boots, a sound I had known since I was 9 years old. I passed the family pictures on the wall, the ones Dad refused to rearrange after Mom died. The photos looked frozen in time. Her smile, my childhood haircut, Blake's missing front teeth. So much had changed since then, but the pictures stayed exactly where they had always been. Untouched, like they belonged to a life more honest than this one. I reached my bedroom door and pushed it open. The air inside was colder than the hallway, like the heat never fully reached this far. I crossed the room to the small safe tucked inside my closet. It belonged to Mom. She used to keep silly things inside, like birthday cards and sewing needles, and a pair of pearl earrings she almost never wore. After she passed away at 2018, the safe became mine. And inside it, I kept something no one in this house had bothered to remember. I knelt down, punched in the 6-digit code, and waited for the soft click. When the door swung open, a stack of folders sat waiting. My heart tightened the moment I saw them. They looked ordinary at first glance, like harmless paperwork, but they held the truth of what this house had cost me. Back in early 2018, just a few weeks after Mom's funeral, Dad started missing mortgage payments. At first it was 1, then 2, then 3. By the 5th missed payment, the bank sent a notice of foreclosure intent. I still remember the morning I found the letter. It was sitting on the kitchen table, unopened, buried under junk mail. The red stamp on the envelope felt like a warning siren. David was sitting in the living room, staring at the muted television. His grief had swallowed his awareness. He barely recognized the world outside the house. Blake was taking community college classes and working a few shifts at the gym, but he was too young and too overwhelmed to understand what a foreclosure letter even meant. I was 25. I had a small gift shop that brought in enough to live on, but not enough to handle something this big. But I sat at the table, read the letter 3 times, and understood that our home was about to disappear if someone did not do something. So I did something. I gathered every cent I had saved, the money I had been putting aside for years to expand the shop into the space next door. It was not enough, so I applied for a personal loan in my own name. I told Dad I needed his signature so the bank could freeze interest charges. He had just come back from the cemetery. His eyes were swollen. His hands were shaking. He signed without reading a word. He thought he was signing a permission to defer payments, but he was signing an agreement that added me as a co-borrower on the mortgage. I did not plan to hide it. I just could not bring myself to explain it to him at that moment. The grief in the house was so heavy it made everything feel fragile. And later, when things seemed calm, it felt too late to bring it up without reopening wounds. The truth was simple. I saved the house, and no one thanked me because no one knew I had done it. I picked up the first folder from the safe. Inside were the documents from the mortgage restructuring, almost an inch thick. I opened it and stared at the signature lines. Mine was steady and careful, proof of a girl who understood exactly what she was agreeing to. Under my name were the words, primary borrower. No one in this house had ever spoken those words to me. I pulled out another folder. This one held the bank emails. I skimmed down the page until I found the line I remembered too well. Since you are the main point of contact for the loan, we will continue sending all updated statements to your direct email. David never saw a single email after that, and he never asked why. My hands trembled slightly as I reached for the next folder, the thickest one. I opened it slowly. Inside was a stack of printed bank statements, month after month, of numbers that told a story no one else cared to learn. For 26 months, Dad had not paid his full share. Some months he forgot. Some months he paid half. Some months he paid nothing at all. Every time he fell short, I covered it. Every month, without fail. 26 times. 26 months of choosing the stability of this house over my own. Financial breathing room. The shop could have expanded sooner. I could have hired help. I could have taken a vacation for the first time in my adult life. But I tightened my budget, skipped lunches, and picked up custom orders I did not have time for because I believed this. Home mattered to all of us. Now I stared at the cold leftovers in the fridge and asked myself who it had really mattered to. I sat back on the floor, folders in my lap, and closed my eyes. The ache inside me was not sharp like earlier. It was deeper, older, a pain made from years of sacrifice that no one remembered, let alone appreciated. Dad never asked how I managed to save the house. Blake never asked where the money came from. They just lived here, comfortable, secure, never questioning how the foreclosure letters had disappeared or why the mortgage payments stayed current. Maybe they truly did not know, or maybe a part of them did not want to know. Knowing would mean acknowledging the weight I carried. And acknowledging the weight might mean seeing me in a way they had never allowed themselves to see me. Not the dependable one, not the helper, not the background daughter, but the backbone of this house. I stood up slowly and carried the folders back to the kitchen. The refrigerator light glowed softly as I passed it, illuminating that single plastic container sitting on the shelf. I looked at it for a long moment. It was such a small thing, just a piece of cold turkey and vegetables, but it represented exactly where I stood in this family. A leftover. I set the folders on the counter, right beside the container. The contrast almost made me laugh. On one side, everything I had done to keep this house alive. On the other, the proof of how little I meant to the people living in it. My sacrifices, their disregard. Two truths lying side by side. The kitchen felt colder somehow, but I did not step away. I stood there, with my palm resting on the top folder, my breath steady, my heart no longer fluttering in confusion, but beating with a clarity that had been waiting years to surface. There are moments in life when everything finally lines up, when pieces you tried to ignore snap into place with a force that cannot be denied. As I looked at those folders and that container, I knew I had reached one of those moments. A moment when denial becomes impossible. A moment when the truth demands to be acknowledged, and I was finally ready to acknowledge it. The house they enjoyed, the security they took for granted, the stability they assumed would always be here. It stood because of me, and tonight, I was done pretending otherwise. I stayed there in the kitchen for a long moment, my hand still resting on the top folder, feeling the weight of 6 years pressing through my skin. The furnace hummed softly behind the wall, a low, steady sound I had always found comforting, but tonight, it felt like noise in a house that no longer belonged to me. The refrigerator light cast a pale glow over the paperwork and the cold container beside it. 2 pieces of truth laid bare, one showing how hard I had fought. The other showed how little I mattered in their eyes. Something shifted inside me. Not a sudden burst of rage, not a dramatic collapse, just a quiet, unmistakable click. A realignment. A moment when the heart stops trying to explain away what the mind already knows. I was done carrying the weight of this house alone. I was done making myself small for people who refused to see me. I was done swallowing hurt and calling it loyalty. The storm that had been gathering inside me no longer felt chaotic. It felt precise, steady, sharpened into a single line of clarity that cut straight through the fog of old habits and wishful thinking. I was not powerless. I had never been powerless. I just spent years pretending that their silence was something I deserved. I let out a long breath, the kind that comes from deep inside the body, the kind that takes with it everything you have refused to let yourself feel. The kitchen seemed to stretch and settle around me as if acknowledging them. Change. I reached out and shut the folders, stacking them neatly, almost tenderly. They were pieces of a truth I had hidden to protect my family, pieces of myself I had buried because I thought carrying the burden quietly made me good. It had made me invisible instead. I turned from the counter and walked down the hallway, the house dim except for the faint light from the kitchen. My boots brushed against the runner rug, and the soft scrape of fabric against wood felt grounding. Steady, like my feet knew exactly where they needed to take me. When I pushed open my bedroom door, the cold in the room hit me again. Sharp this time. My eyes moved across the familiar space, the dresser Mom helped me choose when I was 17, the quilt Nora made for me as a graduation gift, the little bookshelf I built with Blake back when we still did things together. These pieces of my life had not changed, yet everything about how I saw them had. This was the room of a daughter who kept choosing a family that had stopped, choosing her back. I reached for the lamp on my nightstand and turned it on. The warm yellow glow filled the room, revealing dust motes drifting like tiny, suspended stars. My shadow stretched along the wall, tall and still. I stared at it for a moment. It looked like someone who had grown without realizing it, someone who had been carrying far more than her frame suggested. Then I walked to the closet. I did not hesitate. I slid the door open and stared at the shelf where my suitcase sat. For a long time, that suitcase had meant vacations I never took, or weekends I promised I would. Give myself, but always postponed. Tonight, it meant something different. It meant leaving behind the version of myself that tried endlessly to earn a place in a home that benefited from me, but never honored me. I reached up and pulled the suitcase down. The thud of its wheels hitting the carpet sounded final in a way nothing else had tonight. I placed it on the bed and unzipped it. The sound of the zipper cut through the silence. A clean, decisive line. There were no tears, no shaking hands, no tremor of fear. Just a quiet acceptance that staying in this house would only teach the people in it that they could keep hurting me without consequence. And I had taught them that lesson long enough. My phone buzzed on the nightstand. For a moment, my chest tightened, expecting Dad or Blake, but the screen lit up with a simple message. Merry Christmas, Lana. Hope you're resting after the rush at the shop. It was from Tessa. Tessa Morrow had been my closest friend since college, the only person who knew what Whitmore gifts meant to me, and how many nights I had stayed up worrying over finances, schedules, and whether I was good enough to run a business on my own. She was a lawyer with a sharp mind and a softer heart than she let people see. She had always told me that if I ever needed legal help or support or a friend to lean on, she was one call away. I stared at her message longer than I expected to. It felt like a door cracking open at the exact moment I was ready to step through it. I did not reply. Not yet. But I knew that if I reached out to her tonight, everything in my life would take on a new direction. A direction where I no longer carried this burden alone. I set the phone down gently, letting the screen go dark. Then I began packing. Not in a frantic rush, not with trembling hands, but with deliberate movements. I folded a few sweaters and jeans. I added the quilt Nora made me, the one thing that always felt like safety. I placed my toiletries in the front pocket and tucked in a framed photo of Mom, taken the summer before she died. Her smile in that picture still made something inside me settle. I moved slowly, steadily, each item a small act of reclaiming myself. When the suitcase was full, I zipped it shut and placed my hands on top of it. The fabric was cool beneath my palms. The weight of it felt real, grounding, like a choice I had finally made for myself. I stood there in the soft lamplight, my hands resting on the suitcase, and for the first time in years, I felt something close to my own reflection staring back at me from the window. Someone I recognized, someone I had not given enough attention to, someone who had waited quietly for me to choose her. This was my snap moment. Not loud, not violent, silent and steady, the way a door closes on a chapter that can no longer hold you. I took a deep breath and let it out slowly. My fingers curled around the suitcase handle, and in that small, almost tender gesture, I realized I had finally touched the part of myself I had abandoned long ago, the part that deserved to be chosen. That thought stayed with me as I held the suitcase handle. It moved with me as I turned off the lamp, as I walked through the dim hallway, as I paused in the kitchen one last time and looked at the folders beside the cold leftovers. I did not feel guilty. I did not feel unsure. I felt finished. There was nothing left for me to give this house tonight. I slipped on my coat, lifted the suitcase, and stepped outside into the quiet cold. The air hit my face with a sharpness that felt cleansing. Snow dusted the edge of the driveway, sparkling under the weak streetlight. For a moment, I simply stood there, listening. The neighborhood was still. Not a single car passed. Somewhere in the distance, a wind chime clinked softly. I locked the door behind me and walked toward my car, my boots crunching lightly against the snow. I did not look back at the house. I did not need to. The weight of what it represented had already loosened its grip on me. I started the engine and drove slowly down Maple Glen Drive. Past the glowing windows I had admired earlier, families still sat gathered at their tables. Laughter still drifted out through curtains, but I did not ache for it the way I had before. I felt like a person stepping out of a story that no longer fit. At the end of the street, instead of turning toward the highway and the chain hotel near downtown, I turned left. My hands moved without hesitation. My mind was clear. I was going to Nora Hayden's house. Nora lived only a few blocks from us, in a little blue craftsman home with a porch swing and a wind chime shaped like hummingbirds. She had been our neighbor for decades, the kind of woman who remembered birthdays, who knew the pattern of every season on the block, who always had a warm dish ready when someone fell on hard times. She had been a friend to Mom first, then quietly stepped into my life after Mom passed as if she knew the ground beneath me had shifted. When I pulled into her driveway, her front porch light glowed a soft amber. It always did. She kept it on for herself, she said, but I always suspected she kept it on for others, too. I grabbed my suitcase and walked up the steps. I had barely raised my hand to knock when the door opened. Nora stood there in a long cardigan, her silver curls pulled back loosely, her eyes soft the way they always were when she looked at me. She took in my coat, my suitcase, the tired set of my shoulders. She did not ask a thing. She simply stepped forward and wrapped her arms around me. I let my forehead fall against her shoulder. She smelled like cinnamon and laundry soap, familiar and grounding. She held me the way Mom used to, just long enough for the pieces of my heart to settle without falling apart. "Come in, sweetheart." Her voice was quiet, steady. "You're safe here." Inside, her house glowed with warm Christmas lights. A small tree sat in the corner, decorated with ornaments she collected over a lifetime. The fireplace crackled gently, and a pot of something fragrant simmered in the kitchen. I set my suitcase by the door and followed her inside, feeling warmth return to my fingertips, to the center of my chest. "Sit for a minute," she said, guiding me toward the sofa. "I'll get you something warm." While she walked into the kitchen, I pulled my phone from my pocket. 4 missed calls from Dad. 1 voicemail. 2 messages from Blake. A photo from their dinner, still bright on my lock screen. My stomach hardened. I did not want their words in my head tonight. I did not want their excuses, their confusion, their sudden attempt to account for me after leaving me behind. Without giving myself time to hesitate, I opened my contacts and blocked Dad's number. Then Blake's, then the home phone. A clean break. A quiet one. The kind that still splits the air in two. Then I held down the power button until the screen turned black. The silence that followed was not empty. It was restorative. When Nora returned, she handed me a mug of chamomile tea and looked at me with that unspoken understanding she had always carried. "Whatever happened," she said gently, "you don't have to explain it tonight." I nodded. I did not trust my voice yet. After a few sips, I placed the mug on her coffee table and pulled my laptop from my bag. Some choices cannot wait until morning. Some boundaries must be drawn while the clarity is still fresh. I logged into my mortgage account. Because I was the primary borrower, the dashboard opened instantly, listing every detail Dad had never bothered to learn. I clicked on the auto-pay settings and removed my card. It took seconds. A clean, undeniable line in the sand. Next, I changed the login password, replacing it with a long, complex string I knew Dad would never guess. My hands were steady. My heartbeat slows. There was no guilt, just the truth. Then I navigated to the contact information page and updated the mailing address to a post office box I had rented months ago for the shop. It felt strangely symbolic, redirecting the correspondence of a house I had kept standing alone. By the time I finished, something inside me felt solid, like stone settling into its rightful place. "You all right, honey?" Nora asked, settling beside me. I nodded again. More all right than I had been in a long time. Before I could respond fully, headlights swept briefly across the curtains. A moment later, there was a soft knock on the door. Nora went to check, her steps light. Through the window, I saw a familiar patrol car parked at the curb. It was Ryan Caldwell. He lived a few houses down and worked night shifts with the local police. Ryan had always been kind to me, the sort of man who checked on elderly neighbors when storms rolled through, or carried groceries for new moms. There had never been anything romantic between us, just a quiet familiarity that came from living on the same street most of our lives. He stood on the porch, his uniform jacket thick against the cold, his breath clouded in the air. When Nora opened the door, he nodded politely to her before looking at me. "You okay, Lana?" he asked softly. It was not intrusive, not prying. It was the simple question of someone who had noticed me arrive with a suitcase on Christmas night and cared enough to ask. "I'm all right," I said. "I just needed a change of scenery." He studied me for a second longer, then gave a small, understanding nod. "All right, if you need anything, you know where I am." When he walked back to his car, the snow crunched under his boots, the sound fading as he drove away. It was strangely comforting. That brief check-in from someone who had no stake in my life, yet still cared, enough to knock on a door. Nora closed the curtains and touched my arm. "Let's get you settled." She led me down the hallway to her guest room. The bed was already made with soft flannel sheets, the kind that felt like a warm embrace. A quilt hung over the footboard. A small lamp cast a golden glow over the dresser. I changed into pajamas, folded my clothes over the chair, and slipped under the covers. The bed welcomed me instantly, cradling the parts of me that had carried too much for too long. As I lay there, the quiet of Nora's house wrapped around me. No tension, no expectation, no cold leftovers waiting in the fridge. For the first time in years, I did not fall asleep hoping for my family to choose me. I fell asleep choosing myself. While I slept in the soft warmth of Nora's guest room, the night outside drifted toward morning. Back on Maple Glen Drive, my family was still sitting in a glowing Denver restaurant, laughing over dessert, unaware that anything in their world had shifted. They had no idea that the person holding their home together had quietly walked out of it. It was a little after 1 a.m. when Dad and Blake finally pulled into the driveway. The neighborhood was silent. The sky held that deep winter darkness that sometimes makes sound carry farther than it should. Da stepped out of the truck first, tugging his coat tighter around his shoulders as his breath curled in the air. Blake followed, his voice low from the cold and whatever holiday drinks he had enjoyed. Their footsteps crunched through the thin layer of frost as they made their way to the front door. Dad fished out his keys and pushed the door open. The hinges gave a tired groan. Inside, the house greeted them with the same silence that had greeted me. But this time, I was waiting to speak. Dad stepped into the entryway, flipping the light switch on with the casual expectation of someone who believed life would always be the same when he returned to it. Blake wandered toward the kitchen, stretching his arms and humming the melody of some Christmas song they had probably heard over dinner. It took only a few seconds before something felt off. Dad paused, narrowing his eyes at the closed hallway. Something in the air was too still, too untouched. He walked down the hall toward my room, maybe expecting to see my light on or hear movement inside, maybe expecting me to lecture him gently for staying out too late, or to tease him for forgetting that I'd come home early from the shop. He pushed my door open. The empty room breathed its truth into him. No suitcase, no coat slung over the chair, no shoes lined neatly against the wall, just the bed, the dresser, and the leftover imprint of who I had been in this house. Dad froze in the doorway. Blake heard the stillness and hurried over. "Dad, what is it?" Dad stepped aside, letting him see. Blake's eyes widened. His voice dropped. "She left." David shook his head slowly, as if the room itself were lying. "No, she must be at Nora's, or working late or something. She does not just leave." But she had. And the house did not hide it. Dad forced himself away from the doorway and walked toward the kitchen, needing something to anchor the rising panic. The overhead light hummed faintly as he stepped inside. For a moment, he did not notice the envelope on the table. His mind was searching for reasons, excuses, explanations that did not require him to accept the possibility of staring at him. But Blake saw it. He reached for the envelope, his fingers brushing the surface. On the front, in my handwriting, were the words, "For when you finally notice." David turned sharply. "What is that?" Blake swallowed. "It is from Lana." David snatched it from his hand and tore it open. The first thing he saw was the refinance contract. Then the bank statements. Then the emails, line after line, page after page, all showing something he had never bothered to learn. The mortgage details, the missing payments, the months I had covered for him, the proof that I had been the one keeping the house alive. He flipped through the pages faster and faster, his breathing turning uneven. He stumbled across a printout of an email that read, "Thank you for your prompt payment, Miss Whitmore." He stared at the words as if they might rearrange themselves into something he could accept. Blake leaned closer. "Dad, she paid this." Dad did not look up. No, she did not." Blake's voice cracked. "Dad, she did." At the very bottom of the stack was a single handwritten line from me. "I have heated up leftovers long enough." Dad's shoulders dropped. Blake stepped back, like the realization had physically struck him. "Oh, God," Blake whispered. "What did we do?" Dad grabbed his phone from his pocket and dialed my number. The call rang once before going straight to voicemail. He tried again. Same result. Then he tried the house line. Then my work line. Then my number again. Nothing. He tried texting me. "Please call me." "Where are you? We need to talk." "Lana, answer me." Silence. He called a fifth time before gripping the edge of the table and lowering himself into the nearest chair. His face crumpled, not with anger, but with the dawning realization that the daughter he had dismissed, overlooked, and taken for granted had carried a weight he had never bothered to see. The man who always believed he knew what was happening under his roof now understood that he had not known much at all. Blake sank into the chair across from him, the envelope between them like a wound. "Dad, how did we miss this?" Dad rubbed both hands over his face. "I do not know. I thought she was fine. I thought she did not need anything." Blake stared at the papers in front of him. "She needed us, Dad." The simple truth of it hung in the air, heavier than any silence they had ever shared. Dad looked around the kitchen, seeing it differently now. The red table runner she ironed, the carefully stocked pantry, the mortgage statements she had kept current, the refrigerator light glowing faintly behind the door, shining on the single container she had been told to heat up on Christmas. He stood slowly and walked into the living room. The family photos watched him from the wall. He lowered himself onto the couch, elbows on his knees, fingers pressing into his forehead. The exhaustion of the day, the weight of the truth, the sound of unanswered calls, all of it came crashing into him at once. The house felt colder without me in it. More than that, it felt unsteady, like something essential had gone missing. David leaned back, staring at the dark ceiling. His voice was barely audible. "I did not know. I did not know she did all this." But the truth sat open on the table, undeniable. And for the first time in a very long time, David understood what it meant to lose something he had never imagined he could lose. He stayed there, hunched forward in the dim light, papers scattered across the floor at his feet, and the house around him finally reflecting what he had refused to see. I was gone, and the world he thought he controlled had suddenly, unmistakably, shifted. Dad stayed in that living room for a long time, but eventually, even shock breaks into motion. And while I slept at Nora's, wrapped in the quiet safety of her guest room, the sun was rising over Ridgewood. The light came in pale and cold, settling over streets that still held the memory of last night's snow. When I woke, it was the soft rattle of dishes in Nora's kitchen and the faint smell of coffee drifting down the hall. For a moment, I did not move. The peace in my chest felt unfamiliar, like something borrowed, but it was mine. I had earned it. I sat up slowly, stretched my arms, and listened to the house breathe around me. No tension, no waiting for footsteps, no dread of words I could not stop preparing for. Just this morning, just air. I changed clothes and padded into the kitchen. Nora had already placed a mug of coffee on the table for me, the steam curling up like a gentle hand. "Morning, sweetheart," she said softly. "How did you sleep?" "Better than I have in years," I said, and I meant it. But peace rarely goes uninterrupted for long. The doorbell rang just as I took my first sip. The sound was sharp in the quiet room. I froze. Then I looked at Nora, who sighed in a way that told me she already knew who was standing at her porch. She wiped her hands on a towel and walked to the door. Before she opened it, she glanced back at me. "Stay here," she said. I nodded, but I could hear the heavy, uneven breathing of the man on the other side of the door. Nora opened it just enough to step into the frame. Dad's voice came out strained. "Is Lana here?" His tone was not angry. It was frightening. Nora didn't budge. "Mason Whitmore," she said calmly, "I need you to take a step back from my porch." David exhaled shakily. "Nora, please. I need to talk to her." I could picture him perfectly. Wrinkled coat, worry in his eyes, hands trembling, not from cold, but from something heavier. Nora repeated herself with that gentle firmness she mastered long ago. "Step back. Now." There was a pause, then the sound of his boots scraping lightly as he obeyed. She opened the door wider, but only slightly. "Lana is safe," she said. "That is all you need to know right now." Safe. The words sank into me like a truth I had been waiting to hear from someone for years. Dad's breath wavered. "Can I see her? Just for a moment?" Nora turned to look at me. I held her gaze. I did not feel fear. I did not feel small. I simply felt ready. I set my mug down and walked toward the door. Nora stepped aside as I approached, staying close in silent support. Adam's eyes widened when he saw me. His face looked lined in ways I had never noticed, carved deep with a sleepless night. "Lana," he breathed. "Thank God." I stopped 2 steps inside the doorway. That was as close as I allowed myself to move. Nora stayed beside me, her presence steady as a boundary I had never known how to draw for myself. David swallowed hard. "I got home and your room was empty. I called and called. I saw that envelope, and I need to understand." I held up a hand, stopping him. "You have 5 minutes." He blinked, taken aback. 5 minutes? "That is all I am offering today," I said. A flicker of confusion crossed his face, but he nodded slowly. I reached behind me to the small folder I had brought from my suitcase, the one holding the most essential documents. I pulled out a printed bank statement and held it out. David hesitated, then took it. His eyes scanned the page, his brows tightening. "This is the mortgage statement," he murmured. "Why do you have this?" "Because," I said, "I have been the one keeping it current for 6 years. His head snapped up. "What are you talking about?" I stepped closer, my voice steady. "You think this house stood on its own? You think missed payments just disappear? You think foreclosure notices go away by accident?" Dad looked down, again at the numbers on the page, eyes darting as if searching for something he had missed. I pulled out another sheet, and another. And one more, each one documenting the months he did not pay enough, each one stamped paid because I had covered the rest. When he looked back at me, He appeared smaller somehow. His voice was barely above a whisper. "You did this?" I met his eyes. "God, who do you think kept this house standing for 6 years?" He parted his lips, but no sound came out. His gaze flicked between me and the papers like he was trying to rewrite what they said. I waited. He had been silent for too many years. Now it was his turn to feel what that silence created. Behind him, a soft crunching sound caught my attention. I glanced past his shoulder and saw Ryan Caldwell walking his patrol route along the sidewalk. He lifted his eyes toward us. When he recognized me, he nodded once, slow and warm, a small gesture that told me he saw me, supported me, and expected nothing from me. I returned the nod. Just a simple acknowledgement, but the moment steadied me even more. David turned slightly, noticing the distraction. "Was that Ryan?" "He is just walking by," I said. Dad swallowed again and looked back at me, eyes red at the edges. "Lana, why didn't you tell me?" I lifted my chin. "Because you never asked." His breath hitched. I watched the realization land on him, watched it pull the air from his chest. I went on. "You never asked how the bills were getting paid. You never asked why the foreclosure letters stopped. You never asked what it took to keep the house afloat. You never asked if I was drowning while you were busy choosing Blake every single time." He stepped forward as if reaching for me, and I stepped back. "No, not today." His arm fell to his side. "I am sorry. I did not know." I nodded once. "You did not want to know. That is different." He opened his mouth, the beginnings of another apology forming. But the shape of his words felt empty to me. I had waited years for recognition that never came. Now that it stood in front of me, it felt too late to carry any real weight. "Your 5 minutes are up," I said quietly. Dad's shoulders caved inward. He stared at me for a long moment, as if studying a version of me he had never allowed himself to see. Strong, steady, unmoved by the old patterns that used to define us. I closed the folder in my hands. Dad looked at Nora, then back at me. "Please, sweetheart, I shook my head. "Not today." The porch light framed him in a pale glow as he finally took a slow step backward. Then another. He looked lost in a way that almost softened something inside me. Almost, but not quite. He turned and walked down the porch steps, his boots crunching against the snow. He reached the sidewalk, paused once as if hoping I would call after him, and when I did not, he kept walking toward his truck. I watched him drive away without feeling that old tug of guilt. For once, I felt something entirely different. Power. Clarity, space to breathe. When I closed Nora's door and leaned into the quiet, I realized how different the air felt inside her home. It carried no weight of expectation, no old patterns pressing against my ribs. I sat for a moment on the edge of the chair in her living room, letting the calm settle into the space inside me. Dad used to fill with doubt. But the peace did not last long. There were decisions to make, and they were not the kind a person should carry alone. By late morning, sunlight filtered through Nora's lace curtains in soft squares across the floor. She set a plate of warm muffins in front of me, then touched my shoulder gently. "You should call Tessa," she said. Not in a pushy way, but in the same tone Mom once used when she knew I was standing at the edge of something important. I nodded. My phone had been off for hours, and for once, I felt no urge to check it. I turned it back on only long enough to send one message. "Can we meet today? It is urgent." Tessa wrote back in less than 5 minutes. "My office. Come anytime." So I gathered every folder, every printed statement, every piece of the truth I had carried alone for 6 years, and placed them into a tote bag. Nora offered to drive, but I needed to do this myself. She only pressed a thermos of tea into my hands before I left. "Take your time, sweetheart. Do not rush the part where you choose yourself." Her words stayed with me as I drove toward downtown Ridgewood, the city buildings rising slowly in the distance. The roads were clear, the sky pale with winter light. I gripped the steering wheel with both hands, steadying myself for what I knew was coming. This was no longer just emotional hurt. It had become a legal matter. A matter of fairness. A matter of finally drawing a boundary that had been ignored for far too long. When I walked into the Morrow Legal Group building, Tessa was already waiting in the lobby. She wore a navy suit and a familiar look of concern mixed with determination. She did not hug me right away. She just looked at me closely, then nodded once. "You are ready." I followed her into her office, warm with oak bookshelves and the faint smell of coffee. She closed the door behind us. On her desk sat a yellow legal pad, a pen, and 2 glasses of water. Tessa did not waste time. "Start from the beginning," she said gently. "Every detail." And I did. I told her about the missed mortgage payments in 2018, the refinance agreement. Dad's signature made in the haze of grief, my role as the primary borrower. The 26 months I paid the shortages, the constant sense that if I let go for 1 second, everything would crumble. The leftovers, the dinner they went to without me, the envelope I left on the table. She listened without interrupting, her pen moving quickly, but her eyes never leaving mine. When I finished, she let out a slow breath. "You have been carrying this alone for a very long time, Lana." I nodded, my fingers twisting gently around the thermos Nora had given me. Tessa turned her legal pad toward me and wrote 3 numbers at the top. 1, 2, 3. "Options," she said. "All reasonable, all legally sound, but each one says something different about what you want for your future." She pointed to the first line. 1. We list the house, sell it. Split the proceeds 60-40 according to contribution and ownership. You walk away, free and clear. I imagined Dad and Blake packing boxes, the house going on the market, strangers walking through Mom's old rooms. It felt drastic, final. Maybe right for some families, but not for mine. Not yet. Tessa pointed to the second line. 2. You transfer full responsibility for the mortgage to your dad. He becomes the sole borrower. You step away completely. My heart gave a small thud. It was logical, clean. But I knew Dad. He would drown under that weight. And Blake would let him. I had watched them together for too many years. Then she tapped the third line. 3. You keep your part ownership. Your dad signs legal agreements acknowledging your role and his failures too. Contribute. He agrees to boundaries you set, takes full responsibility for future payments, and pays back what he owes, or agrees to a formal arrangement. You stay connected to the house without letting them use you again. I stared at that third line. It felt closest to the truth inside me. I did not want to tear the family apart. I did not want to hurt Dad or punish him with something irreversible, but I also could not allow him to continue leaning on me without accountability. Tessa watched me carefully. You are not choosing revenge, Lana. You are choosing fairness. You are choosing a voice after years of silence. Do not confuse those things. The words hit something raw and real. I took a slow breath. Option 3. That is the one. She nodded, as if she had expected that all along. I will prepare the documents. He will have to sign them in the presence of a legal witness. No shortcuts this time. I closed my eyes for a moment, letting the decision settle inside me like a weight that belonged exactly where it was. When I opened them, Tessa was smiling gently. I am proud of you. I felt that more deeply than I expected. After the paperwork discussion, we sat for a few more minutes in a comfortable quiet. Then Tessa leaned back in her chair and gave me a look that felt almost motherly. That woman, she said softly, nodding toward the world outside the window, is finally taking care of herself. On my drive back to Nora's, the sky had turned overcast, the kind of soft gray that makes winter feel muted. I walked into the house to find Nora sitting on the couch knitting something, in shades of blue and cream. She looked up when I entered, her eyes warm with the kind of welcome I had not felt in years. How did it go, honey? I sat beside her, the tote bag of documents still in my hand. It went well. Better than I thought. She nodded and returned to her knitting, her needles clinking softly. After a moment, she spoke again, her voice lowered. I know what it feels like to pour into a family that does not always see you. I turned toward her, surprised. My daughter, Marianne, said quietly. She lived 5 houses down from me for 15 years. I watched her raise her kids, clean her house, and help her husband run his business. She was the backbone of everything, but she was treated like wallpaper, always there, always expected, never acknowledged. My chest tightened. What happened to her? Nora sighed. She finally walked away, packed a small bag one night, just like you did, and stayed with me for a full week. Everyone was shocked, but sometimes a woman has to leave the room before others can see the shape she truly held in it. Her words wrapped around me like a second quilt. You are not alone, Lana, she said. Not in this. Not ever again. I swallowed hard, feeling an ache loosen in my heart. As the afternoon light dimmed, I sat with Nora in that small living room, listening to the soft rhythm of her knitting and letting the weight of the day settle. Tomorrow would bring confrontation. Tomorrow would bring signatures and boundaries and truth laid out in ways Dad could no longer ignore. But tonight, I felt something steadier than anger or hurt. I felt prepared. Later, when the evening settled fully and the house grew quiet, I opened the tote once more and reviewed the papers Tessa had given me. Each page was a piece of the story I had rewritten for myself. I signed where she had marked, one signature after another. Clear, firm, final. When I set the pen down, the choice was complete. I was stepping into justice, not revenge. And for the first time, the road ahead felt like mine. The pen was still warm from my last signature when the next morning arrived, gray and heavy with winter clouds. I woke early at Nora's house, long before the rest of the neighborhood stirred. For a moment, I lay still under the soft quilt she had tucked around me the night before, listening to the faint hum of her heater as it pushed warm air through the vents. The quiet in that room felt unlike anything I had known in years. Not the tense, fragile quiet that came from holding myself small, but a gentle, steady quiet that felt like the world telling me I was safe now. I breathed slowly, my eyes tracing the subtle pattern on the ceiling. The weight of what I had agreed to do the day before settled into my chest, not as fear or dread, but as something sturdier, an anchor, a certainty that the next chapter of my life would not be written by silence, or guilt, or duty, but by choice. Today was the meeting at the bank, the day everything would finally be spoken out loud. I pulled myself from bed, the floor cold under my feet, and dressed slowly. I chose a simple sweater, soft gray with sleeves that covered my wrists, dark slacks, low boots. I tied my hair back neatly. When I caught my reflection in the mirror, I paused. My face looked calmer. My eyes are clearer. There was a steadiness in my expression I did not recognize because it had been buried for so long. I was not the girl who patched holes quietly in secret anymore. I was the woman who was ready to pull the truth into the light. Nora insisted on driving me, even though the bank was not far. She was already waiting by the door when I stepped into the hallway, a wool scarf looped around her neck, car keys dangling from her fingers. She took one look at me and smiled softly. You look ready, sweetheart. Her presence steadied something inside me that had been trembling for years. When she touched my shoulder before we stepped outside, I felt the comfort of someone who had witnessed enough life to recognize a turning point when she saw one. The drive to the Ridgewood branch of Mountain Crest Bank took less than 15 minutes. Snow flurried lightly across the windshield, melting the moment it touched the glass. The sky was a pale sheet of winter white, the kind that made sounds feel muted, as if the world itself was giving me a softer place to land. My heart did not pound or race. It moved with the steady rhythm of someone walking towards something long overdue. Dad and Blake were already there when we arrived. They stood near the front door, Dad with his hands shoved deep into his coat pockets, Blake shifting from foot to foot like he had not slept much either. The moment they saw me step out of Nora's car, both of them straightened in the same stiff, startled way, like they were unsure how to greet me now that the truth was out in the open. Dad looked exhausted. His eyes had that hollow look of someone who had spent the night circling the dead. Same thoughts over and over, with no rest in sight. Blake looked nervous, almost fragile, as if one wrong word might split him open. I walked toward them without hurrying. They did not move to hug me. and I did not offer it. David cleared his throat first. Lana, thank you for coming. I nodded once. This meeting is important. Blake swallowed hard. We just want to fix this. We will talk inside, I said quietly. The three of us stepped into the warm lobby together. The heat wrapped around us, carrying the faint smells of polished floors, printer ink, and coffee from the employee station. A receptionist greeted us and directed us to the second floor, where the private mortgage department was located. The elevator ride was painfully quiet. Dad stood to my left, gripping the railing so tightly his knuckles whitened. Blake stared at the floor numbers, blinking upward, as if focusing on anything else kept him from unraveling. I stood with my hands clasped in front of me, calm, steady, no longer shrinking myself into the background. When the doors opened, Julia Carter was waiting at the end of the hall. She stood as we entered her office, smoothing her blazer with calm professionalism. Her hair was pinned back neatly, her expression composed but warm. I remembered her faintly from years ago, back when Mom still handled most of the financial things. She knew my mother, known our family before everything fractured. Her eyes softened when she saw me. Lana, it is good to see you again. I offered a small smile. Thank you, Julia. Dan Blake took seats behind me. Julia placed me directly across from her at the desk. The arrangement felt intentional, as if this time the room itself recognized what had been true all along, that I was the one who held this story together, that I was the one who had carried the responsibility. Julia folded her hands. I understand we are here to clarify the financial structure of the Whitmore mortgage. Dad shifted in his chair. I did not realize there was anything to clarify. I thought I was... He hesitated. Julia did not. Mr. Whitmore, I reviewed the documents last night. You have been a co-borrower on this mortgage since early 2018. Your daughter has been the primary borrower and has carried the responsibility for keeping this home out of foreclosure. Dad's head jerked upward. His eyes widened with disbelief. Julia continued. In fact, it is my understanding that she saved the home from foreclosure 6 years ago. The silence that followed did not float in the air. It dropped like a weight, a verdict, a truth too large to ignore. Julia turned slightly toward Dad. Did you know who saved your home at 2018? Dad's voice cracked. No, I did not. Then allow me to be clear. It was Lana. She looked at me with a respect I had not felt from my family in years. Something inside me tightened and loosened at the same time. David's elbows sank to his knees. His hands covered his face. For a moment, he looked older than I had ever seen him, smaller, like the truth had stripped away every illusion he had clung to. But this meeting was not about emotion. It was about truth and consequence. Julia pulled out a folder with the documents Tessa had prepared. We have 3 items requiring signatures today. She lifted the first page. Acknowledgement of contribution. This document states that Lana covered the shortages for 26 months and that the bank recognizes her as the primary financial support for the home. David blinked as if the number physically struck him. 26 months. Julia moved to the next page. Responsibility shift. From this point forward, you will assume full responsibility for your portion of the monthly mortgage and any overdue balance. Dad's voice was barely audible. I understand. Julius turned to the final document. And lastly, the boundaries agreement. This is not a bank requirement, but a personal and legal agreement between you and your daughter. Blake leaned closer, reading the lines. No more calls to me when payments were missed. No more letters forwarded to my inbox. No more last-minute rescues that drained my own life to keep theirs balanced. Dad reached out, touching the page with trembling fingers. Lana, I never knew. I looked at him. I know you did not, but that does not change what happened. His face crumpled, tears catching in the lines around his eyes. You deserved better. I nodded slowly. I did. And now I am giving it to myself. Julia placed a pen in front of him. Mr. Whitmore, whenever you are ready. Dad hesitated only a second before signing. Each stroke of his pen felt like a shift in the air, A redirection. A long overdue correction. Blake watched the pen move with wide eyes, as if witnessing the weight of the past settle onto the page itself. When Dad finished, he set the pen down with a hand that trembled. Julia gathered the papers neatly. These will be filed immediately. Thank you all for meeting today. We stood. None of us moved to hug. The air between us felt shifted, not healed, but honest. In the hallway, Blake stopped me. Lana. I turned to him. His expression was raw, stripped completely of the casual obliviousness he had worn for years. I am sorry, he said. Not because Dad wants me to apologize, not because it is the right thing. I am sorry because I finally saw it. I see how you held everything together. I see how I let you. I see how easy it was to lean on you simply because you never complained. And I think I was jealous of you. Jealous of how strong you were. Maybe that made it easier to not notice you slipping. My throat tightened. Not from pain, but from something shifting inside me. An old wound breathing for the first time. Thank you for saying that, I said quietly. He nodded, eyes shining, and stepped aside. I walked through the bank doors and into the cold air outside. The sky above was gray, soft and endless. The air tasted cleaner somehow, like a breath I had been holding for 6 years had finally released. I had not won against my father. I had not defeated anyone. I had won against, and that victory was enough to carry me forward into whatever came next. A month passed quietly. The kind of quiet that feels earned rather than imposed. I had moved into a small apartment in downtown Ridgewood, a one-bedroom on the 3rd floor, with creaky floors and sunlight that drifted in gently every morning. It was not fancy, but it was mine. The first space I had chosen for myself without worrying whether anyone else approved or needed something from me. I furnished it slowly, one piece at a time. A small table from a thrift store, a soft blue rug, a second-hand armchair that Nora insisted on buying for me as a housewarming gift. Every corner of that apartment felt like a promise I had made to myself, a promise to stop shrinking, to stop apologizing for taking up space, to stop choosing comfort for others over dignity for myself. Even the mismatched dishes in my cabinets felt liberating. For once, everything I owned was chosen by me, for me, without compromise. Most nights, I fell asleep listening to the hum of traffic instead of the heavy silence of the old house on Maple Glen Drive. The city noise became a kind of lullaby, a reminder that life continued beyond those old walls and that I had stepped back into it. Every morning, I woke without that sharp knot in my stomach that used to follow me around, like a shadow, a constant reminder of unspoken expectations and emotional landmines. The air felt clearer. My shoulders were lighter. Even the simple act of locking my own door behind me became a quiet declaration that I belonged somewhere again. At first, I half expected to feel lonely, but I did not. Not in the way people warned me I might. There is a loneliness that hurts, and there is a loneliness that heals. What I felt was the second kind, a spaciousness within myself that I had never experienced, a kind of homecoming. Whitmore Gifts was steady too. January was slower, but slower in a comforting way. People returned with gift cards, exchanged items, browsed for birthdays or early Valentine plans. The shelves looked full and alive after the holiday rush. When customers walked in, the bell over the door chimed softly, echoing through the store like a familiar greeting. I found a rhythm again, one that did not drain me or overwhelm me, a rhythm I had chosen. I hired a part-time assistant to help on weekends. Her name was Callie. A quiet college student with a soft voice and an easy laugh that customers seemed to love. Even the way she moved through the aisles had a gentleness to it. She often said it felt peaceful working in the shop, and I believed her. I had poured enough of myself into that space that a little piece was bound to seep into the walls. My world was smaller now, but stronger. Nora texted me almost every day, little things, like a new soup recipe, or a picture of the sunset over her porch. She came into the shop at least once a week, always pretending she needed wrapping paper or a new mug. But I knew she mostly wanted to check on me. Sometimes I spent evenings at her house, eating dinner and listening to stories about her grandchildren. Those evenings settled something inside me that had been restless for too long. Tessa checked on me too, Not as my lawyer, but as a friend. She brought me coffee on slow mornings, asked about the shop, and sometimes sat with me after closing just to talk about anything but legal matters. She helped me restructure a savings plan for the first time in years, seeing me how to prepare for a life built on my own terms. She spoke with clarity, not pressure, and for once, I felt like I was building something steady beneath my feet. And then, there was Ryan. He never pushed for anything more than what I was ready for. He stopped by the shop on his patrols, sometimes just to say hello, sometimes to check if I needed help carrying boxes from the back. He had a quiet steadiness that reminded me of the good in the world I had nearly forgotten. He never lingered too long, never intruded, never presumed. He existed at the edges of my new life like a warm lamp in a dim room. Not romance, not yet. Just safety. Just presence. One Saturday morning in late January, after closing the shop early for inventory, I drove to the Ridgewood Cemetery with a small bouquet of winter flowers, wrapped in brown paper. The snow had melted in uneven patches along the walkway, leaving the ground soft beneath my boots. The air was cold enough to sting my cheeks, but not bitter enough to hurry me along. Mom's headstone rested beneath an old oak tree, the branches bare against the pale sky. I knelt and brushed away a thin dusting of dried leaves. The simple act of clearing the stone felt like brushing off old memories, making room for something new. For a long moment, I just looked at her name, letting the quiet settle into my bones. I placed the bouquet at the base of the stone. "Hi, Mom." The words left me softly, but carried weight, a kind of weight that came from years of conversations we never got to finish. I sat in the cold grass, my hands tucked into my sleeves. You know, I finally stopped heating leftovers. Hearing the words out loud made my breath catch. I felt something loosen in my chest, something that had been knotted there for years. "I think you would be proud. Or maybe you would just tell me it took me long enough." A small breeze passed over the cemetery. I closed my eyes and let it move through me. I have chosen myself now. I really have. When I opened them, the weight that had lived in my heart for so long felt lighter. Not gone, but lifted. Mom had always seen me clearly. I carried that truth with me as I stood and brushed the dirt from my coat. I walked back to my car with a steadier step than I arrived with. Later that week, Blake stopped by the shop. I was rearranging a display of handmade candles when the door chime rang, and he stepped inside. He stood awkwardly near the counter, hands jammed into his jacket pockets. When I looked up, he gave a tentative smile. "Birthday dinner at my apartment this Sunday," he said. Small, quiet. "I would really like you to come." I hesitated, but not because I feared old patterns. I simply wanted to be sure I was choosing from strength, not habit. It was the first time in years I paused before saying yes, and that pause alone felt like growth. I nodded. "I will be there." Utila washed over his face instantly. He stepped forward, hugging me briefly, the kind of hug that said he was trying. Really trying. It did not fix everything. It did not erase the years of imbalance, but it opened a door, a small one, and small doors can lead to large changes. David came by 2 days later. I was sweeping the front of the store when I heard someone clear their throat near the doorway. He stood just inside, hands in his pockets, eyes moving slowly across the shelves and displays. "The shop looks beautiful," he said softly. "Your mom would love this." He looked older, but also humbler, like the weight of the last month had carved out something quieter in him. "I was wondering," he said carefully, "if you might let me help decorate the front window one day, like your mom and I used to do when you were little. Only if you want, of course." I studied him for a moment. He was trying too, and that mattered. I pointed to the calendar behind the register. "Tuesday afternoon. You can come then." A smile tugged at the corners of his mouth. "Thank you, sweetheart." He did not ask for more. I did not offer more. Boundaries held, steady and quiet, like the new scaffolding of our relationship. It felt strange at first, building something new with him, but it also felt necessary, like carefully placing stepping stones across a river you once thought you would drown in. In the evenings, when I returned to my little apartment and kicked off my shoes by the door, I sometimes paused in the middle of the living room and just breathed. I never realized how loud silence could be when it was peaceful instead of empty. I never realized how much space I had been denying myself, shrinking my needs to fit someone else's comfort. Now the space belonged to me, my choices, my voice. My Christmas was no longer an afterthought. One night, I sat at my small kitchen table, sipping tea while the streetlights outside flickered across the window. The world was quiet, and I felt a warm sense of clarity settle over me. Not anger, not hurt, just understanding. Some families love you loudly, some quietly, and some love you only when it is convenient. But if you wait too long to be chosen, you forget you were allowed to choose yourself all along. That was my lesson, the one I earned the night I came home to a dark house and a container of cold leftovers. The one that carried me into every decision that followed. If you have ever been told you were too much or not enough for your own family, remember this: silence can be power, and truth can be the loudest revenge. Tell me in the comments what integrity means to you and where you are listening from.
I had to stop and wipe away tears 3 times, feeling a mixture of pity, anger, and overwhelming pride. As a woman who had been treated like an unpaid maid by her family many times, I saw myself in Evelyn 200%. This story isn't just Christmas drama. It's a powerful slap in the face to those toxic parents who still think children are born to serve them. I absolutely detest Richard's "heat up the leftovers" message. It wasn't just a phrase, but a whole system of contempt that had lasted 30 years. But I loved, madly loved, the way Evelyn transformed her pain into a perfect farewell party, without a single swear word or tear in front of them. It made me wonder, if it were me, would I have the courage to get up from the table and never come back? Introduction. The perfect Christmas dinner. Evelyn, 38, a pediatric surgeon in Chicago, flew back to her parents' suburban Ohio home, as usual. The house was beautifully decorated. The smell of gingerbread cookies filled the air. Jingle bells played. Everything was picture perfect. She cooked 7 main courses, roasted a 9 kilograms turkey, and made cranberry sauce from fresh fruit. Her parents, brother Ryan, sister-in-law Melissa, and 2 nieces sat around the table, chatting and laughing. I've experienced meals like this before. Warm on the outside, cold on the inside. The fateful message after everyone had finished eating and moved to the living room to open presents. Evelyn's phone rang. A message from her father. "Could you reheat the leftovers in the refrigerator for us? Your mother is tired." No thank you, no glance. Just a short, curt command like speaking to a maid. That moment was captured in slow motion on video. I saw Evelyn standing motionless in the kitchen, still holding the dishcloth. I understand that feeling, like being stabbed in the heart. Recalling 38 years of being treated like a high-class maid. Video with interspersed flashbacks. At 10, she had to clean the whole house because girls should know how to do housework. At 18, she gave up a full medical scholarship at an Ivy League university to stay home and care for her mother, who suffered from depression. Actually, her mother was lazy. At 25, she paid off all her parents' and brother's credit card debt. At 32, she bought her current house in her parents' names because they're getting old. Every time she achieved something, the response was always, "Great, now you can help the family." I cried at this point because it was so similar to what my mother used to say. "You should study hard so you can take care of your siblings later. What else would you do with that?" 30 minutes of reheating leftovers, a spectacular performance. This is the scene I watched 5 times because it was so good. Evelyn didn't cry, didn't argue. She silently put on her coat, took out the suitcase she'd already kept in the trunk of her car. She'd had it ready for 2 years. She turned off all the Christmas lights, unplugged the Christmas tree, and switched off the heater. She left an envelope on the dining table, inside which was the contract for gifting the house to her parents. She had already signed it with a notary public. The keys to the new house. A small, handwritten note read, "I've been reheating leftovers for 38 years. This Christmas, it's Mom and Dad's turn to do it themselves. Happy Christmas, Evelyn." She locked the front door, activated the remote security system, and blocked all family phone numbers. Immediate consequences, the family frantically called 127 times, sending apologies, insults, and threats of disowning her. Ryan, her brother, even live-streamed on Facebook complaining about his ungrateful sister abandoning their parents in the middle of Christmas. The online community dug up the truth, discovering that Evelyn was a doctor who had saved hundreds of children, while Ryan was a dependent living off his parents. Richard had to order frozen pizza for the whole family to eat on Christmas Eve. The video showed him sitting alone amidst a pile of pizza boxes, the Christmas tree lights turned off. I felt both pity and schadenfreude. 1 year later, Evelyn is truly alive again. She bought a penthouse overlooking Lake Michigan, decorating for Christmas just for herself and her friends. She established a charity named after her grandmother, the only person who ever stood up for her. Her parents aged visibly, having to sell off some belongings to survive because they no longer had a mobile ATM. At the end of the video, Evelyn looks directly at the camera and says, "I'm not abandoning my family. I'm just stopping making leftovers that people keep reheating." The costly lesson I learned: unnecessary isn't just a single message. It's the straw that broke the camel's back in an ocean of disrespect. Don't wait until someone says it directly to realize you're being taken advantage of. Family love is not a one-sided obligation. If you give 100% and receive only commands in return, that's not love, it's emotional slavery. Preparing an escape route in advance is the smartest way to show self-love. Evelyn had her suitcase ready, her contract ready. She didn't act on anger, but had planned it calmly for 2 years. Silence is sometimes the most powerful answer. She didn't need to shout, didn't need to give lengthy explanations. A single clear action was enough to make the whole world understand. To this day, I still keep this video in my watch when you need strength playlist. If one day I hear the phrase, "You're the eldest daughter, you should be the one to take care of things," I'll open this video and remember, I have every right to get up from the dinner table, turn off the Christmas lights, and go find my own light. It's not just a story, but a bitter pill that has helped many people dare to live for themselves. Which part did you find the most satisfying? Or is there any quote from the father that you will never forget in real life?